The canine continued to bark at the carol, a statue of St. John Paul II, during liturgy. Voila, leaves everyone in turn. Suddenly the sun ascended languidly above the Millbrooks rooftops, emitting warm rays. The settlement was located on the old brick streets. Reviving and bringing with it St. John Paul II is a little obscure church. Under the majestic Millbrooks shadow, Thomas, the cathedral father, was a man with a soft glance and graying temples. His movements in preparation for morning mass were composed and thoughtfully contemplating years of dedication and effort inside the building, but unable to avert. There was a lovely coldness in the church, and the air was filled with the aroma of incense. Father Thomas examined the recently erected statue of St. Paul II, which stood by the altar with pride. Something about the way it was expressed made the priest pauses briefly, experiencing an odd uneasiness. He promptly brushed the sensation and putting it down to exhaustion after during a restless night. The faithful started to fill the pews as they pour into the church. With a soft murmur of dialogue and among their prayers, Rachel was a local educator whose eyes are Sean's with intense Jack. A mechanic sat next to Faith, whose powerful hands stood in stark contrast to the Sean's rosary, was held delicately. Olivia was standing at the rear of the church. The choir directors are getting ready to conduct the ceremony. As usual, the Mass started with hymns of prayer permeating the nave, bearing consolation and optimism. But as Father Thomas came forward to deliver the sermon, unexpected events occurred in the church. Doors exploded with a loud crash, allowing in, this was not a dog and a gust of wind, common dog friend, as the villagers referred to. He was regarded at Millbrook as a mild stray that is typically quiet and amiable. He was acting differently this time. His fur was unkempt and his eyes were perpetually open. Without hesitation, he sprinted while bristling. By ignoring the astonished via the nave, the loyal friend's gasps when he halted in front of St. John Paul II's statue. He started to yell, his voice loudly, interrupted by reverberating off the walls of the cathedral. Father Thomas's portion of the service, startled by this strange conduct, I tried to keep his cool, friend. He approached cautiously and asked, "The wrong friend." The friend ignored. He kept his eyes on the statue and his barking grew louder and louder. Determined, the parishioners started to look. As a horrible omen, they murmured to one another. Crossing, an elderly woman mumbled, "Perhaps it's just a rat behind the wheel for her." The statue depicted a young guy attempting to, Rachel, come up with a sensible reason. Watched the situation with increasing alarm. Something in Buddy's actions appeared strange to her, as though the dog was Jack is attempting to convey a message to them. His forehead furrowed as he sat next to her. "I've never witnessed a friend behave this way," Father Thomas murmured, observing the rising apprehension among believers. "My beloved, I have chosen to interrupt the Mass." When he spoke to the assembly, "It looks like we have a surprise visitor today. I propose that we pause to consider why he didn't." "Complete his sentence now, friend," ceased barking and started picking at the statue's base with his paw, the stone pierced by the sound of claws scrapping. The quiet that had descended in the everyone in the church held their breath, observing the dog's resolute attempt to discover something unexpectedly, as though he was afraid of something. Languidly, "Buddy!" Leaping away from the monument, they fled, leaving the chapel as soon as he had seemed to leave him, shocked. Father Thomas and the parishioners, who stood standing still and gazing at the location where the phenomenon had just a moment ago, the dog had been scratching the Mass, was completed in a setting of uncertainty and stress as the faithful left the church. Discussion centered on about a single subject, What had your friend seen or thought? It was an animal whim, or Father Thomas left something more unattended. Inside the church, the statue of St. John Paul X was closely scrutinized, the area where the friend had been scratching so passionately that at first look there was nothing out of the ordinary. But when the priest fled, he felt something with his hand over the base. An odd little fracture that is nearly undetectable, that he was unaware of prior to stepping in the quiet of the deserted church. Father Thomas had a chill. Something in his gut told him that what had transpired was only the start, that the enigma they are witnessing, possibly larger and more hazardous than from a distance anyone could picture. Father Thomas, a gentle barking friend, arrived. Realized that nothing would change from now on, would similarly exist in his tiny parish in the night following, in the center of Millbrook. The church incident turned out to be designed with innate curiosity. For Millbrook's residents, bed, Father Thomas gazed at the ceiling, his mind swirling about the events of the morning, Buddy's actions. That unexplained fear in the dog's gaze refused to let him sleep. After a few hours of unsuccessful sleep attempts, he got up and walked to the moon window, lighted the deserted streets, bringing long shadows far away, close to the chapel. The priest saw a shadowy hat. He looked at the silhouette in an attempt to identify the form in which Buddy was seated, standing still before the church entrance, as though on guard duty. What do Father Thomas, their friend, is visible, muttered to himself in a worried tone, expanding in her heart and increasing in his capabilities. Rachel's tiny apartment also prevented her from planning. She tossed and turned in her sleep until settling into a tense dream at last, in the image of John Paul V in her dreams. Showed up, but not the way she had known him from pictures or artwork that depicts this variation of. The Pope was concerned about, as though attempting to alert her to John had a nightmare about something awful. The cult Paul came up to her and whispered, "Keep an eye out for what's concealed." Rachel awoke to the darkness of escape. She glanced at a sweat-soaked scream. The time was 3 in the morning. Mechanic Jack stayed the night in his His thoughts kept returning to the workshop. He assisted in installing the statue in the. Something was bothering him at church. He had an unexplained premonition. The instruments he employed to work on the statue and froze were encased in rust, even though you usually take good care of yours. This is not doable with his equipment. Whispered, pressing his eyelids together. Olivia, the choir leader, was shocked. Opted to spend the night in the chapel. She sat in a pew and recited the rosary when she abruptly heard a gentle "My mum." She checked the area, but nobody was. The whisper spread there till Olivia could hear the words "God" quite well. "Keep it safe and don't release it." She fled the church in terror. Meeting a friend on the stairs who saw. In the morning, he looked at her with his wise eyes. Father Thomas summoned Rachel to a meeting. Olivia and Jack met in the parish. They all appear worn out and anxious. Hall. Thomas, our friend's father, started, "I believe everyone has the feeling that something is amiss." Would like us to discuss our experiences with Rachel was the first to break last night. "I had a dream about the silence," she remarked in aid. John Paul II's quivering voice was alerting me to anything she told me. The others listened to her dream. With Jack's mounting uneasiness was evident in his rusted, "This isn't typical." He said, "Since I used when putting the statue in place, Olivia, I've never seen rust appear so rapidly, shaken and pallid." She described the whispers to heard in the church that it seemed like something or someone was attempting to interact with us by ending with a hug. Thomas, her father, let out a deep sigh. "There's something going on in our parish," said, "and I suspect that this is simply the starting." Right then, on the threshold, the hall exploded open. Tommy's father, a young altar boy, was there, shouted, panting, "My friend is gone." They all exchanged glances with one another, and Buddy the dog, who never left, incredulous, "The area around the church has vanished. It's not all Tommy without a TR location." Proceeded with the stained glass windows. "The group has been altered. As soon as they entered the church, they hurried there. They froze in awe of the discolored glass windows that had biblical scenarios that were portrayed, now appeared to disappear, having an independent existence. The figures on the glass are active and lively, as though attempting to escape their frames." Father Thomas came up to the St. John Paul II statue in the peak. He saw something in the daylight that he hadn't observed before, to a small inscription on the foundation that is nearly imperceptible to the human eye. He read the carved inscriptions by leaning in. "What is cadest infernum, main infernum?" "Rachel, let it stay that way." Beside the priest, I sensed a change. "What does the unexpected chill indicate, Father?" she inquired, but in her heart she already knew. Oh, Father Thomas knew the solution. Slowly stood up, his face going pale. "Indicates that," he mentioned in a low voice, "that something that ought to be kept secret is attempting to escape. And we are the only ones, I'm afraid. Those who can stop it from happening far away. Did you hear a gentle bark, friend?" Otherwise, nobody knew for sure anything. The riddle was no longer unclear. Of Millbrook's St. Michael's Church was just getting started, and its design and the repercussions can extend well beyond the limits of the tiny parish. Behind the horizon, the sun was lowering, and the darkness grew longer. On the streets of Father Thomas was sitting in his office in Millbrook, surrounded by antiquated books and records, and the parish's open journal. His eyes examined the archives that were in front of him. The faded pages is seeking hints that may help to understand the peculiar occurrences of this. He muttered to himself, "It's impossible." He leaned back in the recliner. He had discovered an entry from more than half a century ago explaining comparable occurrences in another church. Additionally, a mystery statue had showed up, followed by a string of mysterious occurrences. A knock on the... He was jolted out of his reverie by the entrance. He closed the journal and remarked, "Rachel." Olivia and Jack came inside the office, appeared worn out, but decided that we had discovered something, Dad. Rachel started in the Old Town Library. Newspapers report on odd occurrences in our church, even prior to Mother Thomas's conflict. Nodding, "I also discovered some information. History seemed to like to repeat itself." Jack set a metal object on the desk. "This is a portion of the instrument I used to install the fully corroded statue." Olivia is not her usual self. Who had been? Until now, no one had spoken. I heard the whispers again, very softly. They were conversing at home this time. Thomas, Father, regarding a key and a gate. I let out a long sigh. As Olivia correctly points out, it's not a coincidence. However, we now need to determine how to satisfy our task for the upcoming hour. They addressed balancing all the advantages and disadvantages. At last, they came to a consensus that choose to conceal the information from the external environment, but to read the book and the information it contains to enhance comprehend its significance and strength. We must, Father Thomas said, be careful. Although knowledge is potent, it can also be harmful. Rachel emphasized that we were in the wrong hands. Ought to design a system that will enable us to keep this information private, even after our absence. Everyone nodded in comprehension. the seriousness of the circumstances, in the situations we were in, the days that followed, the group started acting. Jack used his abilities to make a intricate security framework for the Rachel began the underground cathedral, organizing and evaluating the data included in the book, generating a great deal of thanks to Olivia's connections with the academic world. Started out quietly, investigating myths and tales from searching for connections all throughout the world to their discovery in the interim, Father Thomas had to deal with a challenging problem: how to balance his new position as the guardian of ancient wisdom with his responsibilities as a priest. He prayed for many hours in meditation in search of strength and solutions. When they all got together one evening in Father Thomas's workspace to talk about their progress, something unforeseen occurred. A friend who had been peacefully resting in the corner until he abruptly lifted his head and started gazing intently at a friend. They turned and pointed behind their backs, stood in awe of a fragile, glowing spirit-like entity was floating in midair. That seemed like an old sage, but don't be fearful. The ghost's voice was one that appeared to originate from all directions, and at the same time, I am among the first. I've come to lead you, guardians. For in the hour that followed, the spirit informed them about the book's history, its beginnings and importance. He mentioned earlier Guardians' difficulties and accomplishments, but above all, he alerted them to the risks they could encounter. The information found in the book's possible profit. Enormous power comes with enormous accountability. You need to remain watchful and wisdom. When the ghost vanished, departing, Father Thomas was shocked by the bunch, felt their mission's weight grow even more realistically. This won't be simple, stated while glancing at his friends, but we can accomplish this collectively in the following ways. Weeks. The team put in a lot of effort. Rachel found that the book didn't contain not just stories and myths, but also overlooked facts regarding the characteristics of actuality in human. Jack's study of consciousness in ancient symbols started to comprehend how their power could be utilized for defense, and using her instincts to heal Olivia. And Compassion learned that she could converse with the ghosts of former guardians using their knowledge and experience. Father Thomas discovered a means of fusing his religion with the newly acquired information, generating a link between the ancient and the traditional. To their surprise, their friend's mystery turned out to be an important team member. The dog possessed a remarkable capacity to perceive energy and dangers, alerting them to risks before they ever materialized. But when knowledge and power increase with fresh difficulties, the group started to observe the world's minor changes. Strange atmospheric conditions surrounded occurrences in the town that cannot be explained, individuals acting in unsettling ways. It's as though the line separating the worlds was. Rachel noticed that she was getting thinner during Father Thomas was present at one of their meetings. Nodded, acknowledging that our research must be having an impact on our surroundings. Jack worriedly added, "And what if we're not the only people who have observed this? Or what happens if someone tries to exploit of the circumstances that their anxieties demonstrate?" One evening was justified since Father Thomas was on his way back from late prayer. He had a gut feeling that they weren't typical criminals. When he told the other members of the group that they all understood they had stepped into an other hazardous phase of their objective, they were no longer merely secret keepers, understanding that they had turned into defenders of the harmony between the worlds. "We have to be," Father Thomas answered. "I'm ready." Glancing at his companions, "What we've found may transform the world, but we have to make sure that this modification is beneficial to everyone." As over Millbrook, the five watched the sunset. Guardians, 4 people and 1. A remarkable dog appeared before St. Michael's Church as prepared for the obstacles that they would soon face. They understood in the future that their adventure was only getting started, and the outcome of their wisdom could save the world. Bravery and solidarity. Over Millbrook, gloomy clouds collected, and there was a lot of tension in the air, Father. Olivia, Jack, Thomas, and Rachel stood in their faces in front of St. Michael's Church, demonstrating resolve, and worry Buddy, the devoted companion, closely examined the environment for a year, passed since their remarkable findings in the church's subterranean year of rigorous preparations for study and a developing feeling that something significant was coming up. And now, on this stormy evening, they believed that the trial's time had come. It's today. Rachel, I sense it subtly in the air, acknowledged that the lines separating the worlds are losing weight. If we don't, something she didn't have to do in order to, everybody understood the consequences if the havoc they had unleashed failed. A year ago could eat not just their town, but, Jack, check the entire planet, the safety precautions he had implemented. One final time around the church, everything is prepared. But will it be sufficient? Olivia touched his shoulder with her hand. We must be in the final line of defense. My friend suddenly started growling. He stared at the shadows behind him. The church simultaneously, Father, the key in Thomas's pocket began to throb warmly. It's starting, he figures. Whispering came out of the people in the shadows, but something, their eyes gleamed with an aura of unusual illumination, and their motions were Rachel, cultists who are too supple and flawless. They must have sensed the strength, he said. Of the book, the group was prepared, Dad. Thomas moved forward with the police, and we won't permit him to have the antique key. You must assume this authority, he replied forcefully. You don't know what you're interfering with the cult's leader standing tall. A pale-faced man grinned icily on the other hand. Father, we are fully aware of the threat that we are searching for. Why would you give us access to divine power? Keep it hidden from the public, because this mortal Olivia is not suited for power. Her tone was calm but forceful when she responded. Tension should not be revealed through secrets, expanded with every additional friend who went by. Snarled more loudly, and the atmosphere appeared to vibrate abruptly with the energy that had gathered. The bolt of lightning tore the sky, and the ground shook under their feet. There was a loud explosion from within. The church, as though a massive jack is attempting to open the gate. Without wasting any time, it shouted its opening. The group hurried into the church at that moment, with the cultists pursuing them closely as they arrived at the secret entrance to the subterranean. They observed that the highest-graded hypnosis machinery had been erected in the center of its spin. A light that pulsed was coming from Father Thomas. Was aware from within that they had only one. Perhaps we should close the gate? Prior to a cataclysmic merging of the realms, there was conflict when Jack and Olivia attempted to prevent the father of the cult from... Rachel and Thomas tried to get to the fending off the gatemate, rushed between them, adversaries and defending his companions, and Rachel observed the intensity of the conflict. Her blood figures were frozen by something. Started coming out of the gate, creatures from myths and legends, some lovely, some, she yelled, fearful Father, if you don't stop them, everyone will turn into a battleground. Between Father Thomas from myths arrived at the gate. Displaying the key before him as a shield, he was aware of what needed to be done, but the cost was hefty, and he glanced at his pals, at the conflict surrounding them, and created his decision. Pardon me, he muttered at that moment. Directly entered the light of the Rachel sobbed as she tried to stop him at the gate. However, It was already too late. Thomas went through the doorway. The cathedral as a whole was filled with dazzling light for a short time. Everyone's mythical guardians and cultists. Creatures stopped moving and then quiet when the light went out. The gate was shut, and the cultists were lying unconscious on the ground, and the legendary creatures had disappeared. But Dad, Rachel, and Thomas had also vanished. Olivia and Jack stood stunned, attempting to comprehend what just occurred. Friend went to the fence and started to whine. He gently offered himself as a sacrifice for Olivia. She spoke in a whisper, her voice shaking. With Jack nodded with emotion and shut the gate. Rachel, he saved us all from the inside out, felt her cheeks well up with tears. But what is our mission at this point? There was a light breeze at that point, and a well-known glowing figure appeared in the atmosphere as the spirit of the guardian from ancient times who had come to Shanma. They left a year ago, but your task is still ongoing. On the contrary, he stated gently, it's only Thomas, the first father, is still alive. He has been a part of the story for all time, part of the myth, and you have to keep going. The ghost referred to the book in his work, which rested unaltered on the altar. While knowledge must be safeguarded, balance is necessary for the world to be used wisely. Between magic and reason, between faith and science, you are now the defenders of this equilibrium. As the soul vanished, the three companions gazed upon. There was sorrow between them, eyes, but also a fresh resolve. So Jack said, taking a long breath, "How do we begin, Rachel?" Breathe grinned, despite the tears in her eyes from the starting with Father Thomas's tale, by educating people about the power of exists. However, it may not always appear to be, the Olivia nodded as we anticipated, and by making certain that the line between worlds stays steady, allowing miracles to may occur, but without endangering the balance. Buddy gave a joyful bark, as though declaring his support for this strategy. When the first rays of light departed the church, of sunlight were penetrating the clouds, Millbrook was awakening, oblivious to the dramatic developments that had transpired for Rachel during the night. A new chapter in Jack, Olivia, and Buddy's lives was starting out as secret keepers, as advocates for maintaining the harmony between worlds. Their voyage was lengthy and intriguing. Somewhere in the realm and ahead of them of stories and myths, Father Thomas grinned, understanding that his offering had not been for nothing. The tale of St. Michael's Church and its remarkable guardians would keep motivating the next generation, will look for wonders in daily existence and the magic in reality in the ensuing months. Olivia and Rachel Jack put in endless hours of work, must carry out their new responsibilities as guardians. Each of them contributed their special talents to the challenge of assembling a strong team. Given her experience as a teacher, Rachel started creating strategies to discreetly present the idea of magic and equilibrium into her teachings. She discovered that children were especially open to the archaic symbols and allowed their impressionable minds to either be considered or deny whether a potential of an other reality. Jack was visible to them using his mechanical abilities to improve security, even more structures surrounding the chapel. In the concealed subterranean room, he also began researching the archaic symbols and illustrations in the book, discovering methods to integrate their strength into useful safeguards. Olivia's capacity to converse with the ghosts of the past guardians were quite helpful. Through these discussions, she gained additional knowledge regarding the background of their mission and acquired knowledge about how to manage the obstacles they encountered. And her music also took on a new level with songs that seems to speak to a force greater than them. The only human friend ever watchful became well known in the community as a kind of unofficial guardians, observed that when he was present, everything appeared to proceed more easily and issues were avoided using the dog's sense of danger, and his steadfast devotion made him an overwhelming vital, an addictive profession, made him an acclimated to their positions as guardians encountered many difficulties. There were efforts by other organizations to find their covert odd happenings in the town that required discreet management, and the ongoing battle to uphold the organization between the ordinary and the especially remembered is the magical one. Event took place within the town's festival every year. As the festivities were fully operational, Rachel saw that the town square's carousel was spinning. Too quickly, it looks like painted horses, to bring children's laughter to life, changed to terrified shouts as the ride threatening to act in an uncontrollable manner. Immediately, the guardian acted. Jack utilized a gadget he made using on the historic humus symbols to delay the carousel. Olivia started to sing in motion, had a soothing aura that calmed Rachel, diverted the terrified crowd. Spectators with a hurriedly made-up tale regarding a mechanical issue, but people were herded away from the danger by a friend. Zone ultimately prevented calamity in the majority and bibliography, with over 40 novelists' transcripts and correspondence, access to the crematorium in ultimately innocuous incident. But the Guardians were aware of it. The lines separating the realms has become less distinct. That day, they were in danger, and just their intervention had kept the turmoil from overflowing. As time went by, the Guardians started to observe little adjustments. Millbrook appeared to be a thriving town, and the zero coronavirus that weren't completely attributed to economic considerations, there was a feeling of balance and health that visitors frequently remarked that there is something unique about this location. Become a recurring theme, but with this wealth brought with it new difficulties. Guardians needed to remain constantly alert against anyone who could take advantage of the town's distinct vibe for their personal benefit. They also had to lead the residents of the town, gently urging them to keep up the delicate equilibrium that made this possible. Prosperity during the entire recollection of Father Thomas continued to serve as a source of the Guardians' courage and motivation. Frequently found themselves curious about what he would perform in challenging circumstances, and they sensed his guiding presence in some way when they are most in need. Throughout the years, Rachel, Jack, and Olivia started to consider the future. They were aware that eventually they must impart their expertise and obligations to a fresh generation of guardians. They started keeping an eye on the young guardians of Millbrook residents are actively searching for indications of the commitment and awareness which would be required for this important role, and thus the cycle went on. St. Michael's Church's history and its secret turned into a silent legend that was passed down through the Guardians' generations. Millbrook continued to be a location where the remarkably peaceful coexisted with the location where reality and magic interacted. A delicate ballet that is always flawless balance. Father Thomas's story with the original Guardians turned into a basic tale that motivates every fresh generation to assume responsibility for defending the world-to-world border. And even though there were numerous obstacles and establishments that separated them from the labor was frequently challenging, and there a feeling of wonder and purpose at all times that rendered everything valuable in more people in Millbrook than anywhere else, realized that reality was much more expansive and enigmatic than most envision. And within that comprehension was both enormous accountability and limitless potential.